Hello. Thank you so much for choosing this activity. I cannot wait to share the process of making a pressed flower resin serving tray with each one of you. My name is Samantha Palmer, and I am teaching today out of Denver, Colorado. And this class is a lot of fun because we have a huge selection of dried and pressed flowers to work with. And we also have a special edition of Poppies added in, which I haven't got to use yet, and I am so very excited to add them to my tray. Before starting any project, I always like to really quickly run through the entire list of materials just to ensure we all have everything that we need. Now we will start at the very top of the list. The first item is our mold. This is a reusable silicone mold that I hope you can refill and reuse. It's very easy to get additional handles, extra resin, and I've actually used this particular mold for signage for one of my friend's weddings. So get creative, keep this mold around. It should last you a long time. Next item on our list is the gold handles. There are screws that come with these handles, but these screws will not be used in today's class. Our handles are going to be set in the resin, so the screws are unnecessary. If you have a bucket for your hardware, you can throw them there, or if you're not going to use them and you don't need them, they can actually be thrown away. Before we move on from these gold handles, I just want to ensure that yours do in fact stand up on their own. A little bit later, these are going to be set in the liquid resin, and it's important to do a little stand test before we get to that point. So I'm just going to carefully test out the bases of my handles to make sure they can stand on their own. If you're having any trouble with this, first check the bottoms. Occasionally, there'll be a little piece of metal sticking out of the bottom hole, which can make the bases sit a little uneven. When that happens, I'll typically tap the base on something firm, which knocks away the metal piece, or if you're still struggling, you could sand that bottom down until the handles easily stand up on their own. Next item on our list is the resin packs. This particular resin comes in two parts. We've got our first bottle labeled A and second bottle labeled B. This resin will also be mixed at a 1-to-1 ratio, equal parts A and B, and this class we're going to be doing a 2-part resin pour. I'll explain why once we get into laying in our flowers. Craft sticks are here to mix resin. The drop cloth. Now I did come prepared. My drop cloth is already laid out. I have a large space to work with here. Resin can get messy, so it is best to protect your workspace with the drop cloth. And if you do find resin ending up anywhere outside of the drop cloth, please quickly grab a paper towel, soak it with rubbing alcohol, and clean it up as fast as possible. The longer you let the resin set, the harder it will be to clean. Mixing cups, we have 2 of them for the 2-part pour. Pressed flowers, a nice selection of flowers. So we have 5 different packs to choose from. That's going to be the hard part here. Gloves, always important with working with resin to keep our hands clean. A long nose lighter. This will be used to remove air bubbles in the clear resin. And finally, we have a small pair of tweezers. These are going to make handling the delicate flowers a lot easier and also allow you to move things around without dipping your hands in the resin. As far as additional items today, we don't really need anything else other than the kit opened up, the drop cloth laid out. Every single one of your materials should be unwrapped, including the mold and the handles, and we're going to jump straight in. Now, before we get into the mix, I'm going to grab a few things and I just want you to match what I have. We're going to start with 1 cup for the first pour. We're also going to need a mixing stick for this first round. We can go ahead and pop open bottles A and B. Let's just get those set out so they're ready to pour. But let's also keep this bag. This is a great place for the bottles to return to ensure they don't leak anywhere. So I'll keep that bag near. And then we will also need our gloves. For this particular class, we're doing a 2-part resin pour. The first layer is a thin base, and it is essentially something for the flowers to stick to. If we were to pour all of the resin at once, it's very hard for the flowers to stay in the position that you put them in because there's a lot of fluidity between that thick layer of resin. So we'll keep this first layer really thin, we'll put all of our flowers down, and then we'll start to talk about when and how to pour the last layer. What's going to go into the cup first is 75 milliliters of part A. You could use something sharp to open up this bottle, but just to keep my scissors from also having sticky resin on them, I like to hold the popsicle stick nice and low in my hand, take the end, pop it through the top, and then you can press the foil back easily with the end of your stick. I'm going to get down eye level with this cup, and I need to measure out 75 milliliters. When you are getting close to 75, stop pouring, let the resin level out, and then decide if you need to add any more. You also have an instruction sheet nearby, so please feel free to refer to that for your measurements. But again, we're going for 75 milliliters here of part A. Part A is thick, it is sticky, so it does take a moment for it to pour. Okay, I am getting near 75. I'm gonna give it one last little glug, and now I'm gonna actually stop pouring for just a second. I just let all of the excess resin drip off the end of the bottle. As this is starting to level out, it's creeping closer to the 75 milliliter mark, but we're not quite there yet. I think one more little splash, and then I should be good to go. Now, let's say you accidentally go over 75 milliliters. That is okay. We just want to match it with part B. So if we go over, make sure part B also goes over a little bit just to keep that ratio even, 1-to-1. I've just measured out my first 75. This is looking great. So I'm going to recap bottle A. When unmixed, this resin will stay liquid for as long as you need it to. So I'll put the cap back on. And just because this bottle has been opened, I'm going to slide it back into the baggie that it came in until we're ready to use it in part 2. In the same mixing cup, we need to add 75 milliliters of part B, so we have an equal ratio of A to B. Just a warning, part B is going to pour a little bit faster, so take things slow. And the notch that we're hoping to reach right now will be 150 in total. 75 of A, 75 of B, for a total of 150 milliliters. Okay, we're getting near, so I'm going to stop pouring again. I need just a little more. Let's add a splash, and then I'm going to let this level out. Ooh, I'm very, very close. I think just a little bit more. I try not to make it go over. And I think we're good to go. Once you reach 150 rather milliliters of resin in total, recap bottle B, and let's put that back into the same bag, which you can seal for now, and we'll come back to this a little bit later. Now in our mixing cup, we have 150 milliliters total. We are going to be hand stirring this resin for about 4 to 5 minutes. I'm going to bring my cup nice and close to the camera and start with a slow, steady stir. My goal when mixing is to not add any additional friction to this cup because heat or friction could cause the resin to set up quicker than we'd like. I am keeping an eye on the clock, but if you're starting before or after, make sure you're setting a timer for 4 minutes, and we might push it to 5. We'll see if we need the extra minute or not. As I am stirring, I am scraping the outer edges of the cup, and I'm also trying to bring the 2 layers, A and B, together by mixing up and down through the middle. I'm dragging the thicker part A from the bottom of the cup, while pushing the thinner part B to the bottom of the cup. While we're mixing, let's start to brainstorm how we want to use these flowers. Now you can go with something as simple as a full tray. There doesn't have to be any sort of design in mind. Simply filling the tray like this example or like the one on your instruction sheet is wonderful. You could also do something on the opposite end of that scale and go for a more of an arranged look. Here we have a diagonal line of flowers through the middle of the tray with a lot of clear space still left. Once this resin has been activated, we're going to pour it into the base of our silicone mold, and we will start dropping the flowers in immediately. We'll have about 20 minutes to work with the liquid resin before the curing process will begin and the resin will get thicker. I've also seen people add things like photos to their tray. You can add clippings of photos or Polaroids, but please make sure they are in fact on photo paper. Beads, buttons, small seashells. The options are pretty endless. Just make sure if you are adding in any additional items that they are thin enough to stay within the mold. If they pop out of the mold, they'll also pop out of your set tray. Now we are a little over 2 minutes in. At this point, my mixture is looking fairly cohesive. It's still a little bit foggy and it's very bubbly. You can expect bubbles. We are going to address most of those with the lighter here soon. But just because we're mixing so vigorously, the bubbles are going to come up. Luckily, this thin layer of resin, most bubbles will release on their own, and the ones that do not, we are going to hit with the lighter in just a moment. I'm not sure if I'll need the full 5 minutes because this is a pretty small cup of resin, but I am expecting to maybe have to stir for the full 5 on the next round when we have a slightly thicker layer to work with. Now for the next 30 seconds, I am going to focus mostly on scraping the bottom and the edges of the cup. I want to make sure that there's no resin that is getting stuck in any of the corners or cracks and not ending up fully incorporated into the final mixture. Now, if you're concerned that your resin isn't mixed enough, add an extra 30 seconds, maybe a full minute, but let's cut it there. We don't want to overwork this mixture or end up adding any unnecessary friction into the cup, which could make the resin set up quickly. I did just hit the 4 minute mark. I am happy with the way this looks. So I'm going to next bring out my mold. I want to make sure the mold is laid out nice and flat. And I'm also going to give myself a little space to the right of the mold where I will end up laying most of my flowers. For me, to the right is easiest. I am right-handed, so I can pick the flowers up and place them directly in my mold. Before I pour this layer in, I want to start to get the flowers ready and prepared. So I'm going to open up the packs and set them over here to my right. If there are any flowers that you know you are not going to use, leave them out. That's okay. You don't have to use all of them. Or if there's someone you're opening the packs, you decide that you're not really vibing with, feel free to move those out of the way just to keep the clutter out of your space. If you're trying to stick with a specific color scheme and maybe some of those colors don't fit, that is sometimes the deciding factor for me on whether or not I will use all of the flowers. Got a few that are stuck in here. Go. These flowers are delicate, so please be mindful. They will break very easily. Pressed and dried are both very important things to have for a tray like this because fresh flowers are going to bring moisture into the resin. They tend to actually bleed their color into the resin and can end up turning a funky shade of brown. So we always need them to be dried, and I prefer them to be pressed for this type of tray because it is so shallow. Okay. So my flowers are slowly getting opened. They are so delicate. I'm just trying to be careful not to destroy them. I mentioned earlier deciding on whether or not you would like a design on your tray, and my goal for today's tray is to fill it completely. Envision my poppies nestled amongst all of the other flowers, and I am envisioning something that is very, very full, kind of similar to what you see on the first picture of your instruction sheet. Now, all of my flowers have been opened. They're just here to my right. I have my mold right here in front of me and my mixed resin that is ready to pour. Tweezers are also nearby, and the lighter is going to be used relatively soon, so let's keep that near as well. We're going to pour all of the resin, 150 milliliters, into the bottom of the mold. The goal is to cover the entire base, so I'm going to pour back and forth, so I'm covering as much of the base of the mold as possible from the beginning, and then I will most likely have to come back and use the popsicle stick to cover up any openings and spread this out evenly across the bottom of the silicone mold. Okay, I'm starting to cover the bottom. Now, I do have a little bit of resin that I can scrape out of the base of the cup, but please be careful. Sometimes this process ends up getting your gloves a little sticky, and we still have a long ways to go. So the goal is to keep the gloves clean as long as possible. However, they are there to get messy, so if it happens, don't stress. That is the last few drops of resin out of my cup. I'm going to scrape the sides of the stick, scrape the bottom of the cup so it's not dripping. And this cup could be recycled if you like, but I am just going to throw it away. It is meant to be a disposable rather, measuring cup, and it is sticky and wet right now, so just to keep my space clean, it went into the trash. I have a few small spaces right here up against the edge that are not covered. So I'm going to bring my popsicle stick in, and I'm just going to gently work this resin into any nooks and crannies that it has not yet covered. We want the entire bottom of the mold to have a thin layer of resin on it. Okay, that is looking good. I'm not sure that I'll need this popsicle stick again, but before I throw it away, I just want to very quickly look for any bubbles that are stuck to the bottom of my mold. Bubbles that are on the bottom of the mold will stay stuck, so the lighter won't have a chance to pop them. I don't have very many, but I do have a few that are a little bit larger that have sunk to the bottom, and I'm just going through and kind of raking across those big bubbles to release them from the base of the mold so they can float up to the top. This should only take about 20 seconds. And now this popsicle stick, because it is also sticky and wet, is going to go into the trash. Before adding our flowers, we're going to use the long nose lighter to quickly graze over the surface of the clear resin. The flame of the lighter is going to touch the resin, but we don't want the lighter to accidentally dip in. So there is a sweet spot here. We also want to keep the flame moving. If you hold it in one spot for too long, you could end up leaving a black residue on the clear resin, which unfortunately will be seen. So I'm going to get my lighter up and running, and I'm going to start on one end and slowly graze back and forth. If you have any light reflecting off the surface of your resin, you will see so many bubbles, so way more than you think. And these little bubbles, when the flame hits them, will burst and disappear. As careful as I was being, or I thought I was, I did just accidentally dip barely the end of the lighter into the resin. It does not catch on fire or anything crazy like that, but you will smell the resin burning off of the end of the lighter, which can smell a little bit funky. If the smell of the resin is bothering you at all, please feel free to open up a window, turn on a fan, and do what you need to do just to keep air circulating around you. This is a non-toxic resin. It is safe to use indoors, and that is two things that you always want to keep in mind when you're in the market for resin in the future. Most craft resins that I have found will tick those boxes. And most commercial grade resins for larger scale projects typically do not tick those boxes. So just make sure you know what you're looking at and you read all of the instructions and warning labels on those new products. Okay, I just went from one end to the other with a lighter. And as satisfying as that is, I do want to stop for a moment. The lighter is hot, so please be careful not to set it on your drop cloth. And the resin is also warm, so I want to give that time to cool down a little bit. I'm going to do this one more time, and then after the flowers go in, the lighter is going to be retired for a while. I've never seen it happen, but these flowers are very dry, and I would hate for the flame to accidentally catch one of those flowers. So when the flowers are down, lighter goes away. If I get down low, I can see a few problem areas. So I'm just going to target them. There are a few more bubbles that have risen up. Want those to go away. Some of these other little bubbles will end up being covered with the flowers, but the goal is to clear this resin up as much as possible before we add our flowers in. Okay, I think that's good. I'm going to stop using my lighter. Again, it can be very satisfying, so do your best not to take it too far. And now it is time to layer in the flowers. I'm going for more of a full coverage, full spread. The order of operations here is going to be building from the back up. So let's say you want to tuck a green leaf behind one of your flowers. It's easiest to do this by putting the green leaf in first and then layering the flower on top. You can move things around, so don't feel like they have to be stuck where they get dropped, but the flowers are delicate, and the more you move them around, the more fragile they will become. So just please be careful. Moving them around a lot, you have a higher chance of them breaking. The flowers and the greenery do not need to be dunked into the resin because we have more resin to pour, but we do want them to be stuck to the resin. If you start layering your flowers and you reach a point where dry flower is sitting on dry flower, you'll need to dip the back of the flower first into the resin, almost as if it is glue, and then stack the new one on top. If not, the flowers on the top might shift during the second pour. I am just gently resting these right here on the surface of the resin. There are so many fun flowers in this pack. I am very excited to incorporate most, if not all of them. If there are any pieces that feel too large for you, you can carefully cut them down by removing the stems or pulling some of the leaves off of the green pieces. Let's bring in some of our poppies. These are beautiful, they are delicate. I love that shape so much, right there in the middle. I can't wait to also use some of the bright colors in contrast with this nice bright orange. The purple and the orange are such a fun color combination. I am just trying to spread these out all over the place, but if you do have a design in mind, maybe your flowers are centered, or maybe you go back to the stripe that I showed earlier on one of my examples. This is just one approach, but I hope you are exploring your own creativity here, and feel free to arrange these flowers in whatever that makes sense for you. I will find myself taking some of these bigger pieces that are stuck on a stem and gently pinching some of the small flower buds to remove them from the stem. And to me, these start to act as a natural confetti. They can cover a lot of space, little tiny pieces, and I love this color so much. So I'm gonna add a little pop of color and remove these little tiny flower buds from their stems. I've even seen people take it as far as pulling the petals off of the flower and just using the single petals. Because the resin is active, it has been activated for about 10 minutes now. I want you to set a goal to get all of your flowers onto the sticky resin into the mold within the next 8-ish minutes. We'll say 8 to 10. You do risk, if you push it too much further than that, you risk the resin becoming too firm and the flowers not actually sticking. And if they don't stick, they might not stay in place when we pour our final layer. I'm also taking a few of the poppy stems off. I'm just making them a little bit smaller so they can tuck up against the edges of the mold. I've kept a few with stems though, just because I do like these little thin, delicate stems. Hope you all find this process as relaxing as I do. There is something about working with these delicate flowers that I find to be so calming. Truly a great way to wrap up the day. This little flower, I want to actually stack it on top of one that's already set. So this is a great example of how we can use the resin like a little bit of glue. I'm going to take the flower, just give it a little dip into the resin. So I have resin on the back of the flower, and then we will stick it to the dry flower. If I was to just place that on top, it might move around during the next pour. So the resin can act as a little bit of a glue if you do end up stacking. I know I talked about that a little bit at the beginning, but that was a really nice opportunity to show it off. And I'll probably have a few more of those coming up. I can start to see that my resin is getting thicker. So just to bring us back onto our time schedule, let's try to have all flowers in within the next few minutes. I only have a few more that I'm going to add. I have a pretty big mess of little pieces over here to the side. I didn't actually end up using all of them. I was surprised. I thought I was going to go a little crazy with the flowers, but I have a few that are left over, and that is fine with me. I really like the way these colors have come together, and I'm not sure that this really needs too much more. And as you can see, sometimes it is hard to stop. I told myself that I was done, and I keep finding these little itty bitty pieces that I can't help but add. It is very hard to know when to quit. So if you're struggling with that and you still have more flowers and you're not ready to stop, keep going. Okay, I'm just going to shift a few of these kind of back up against the edges. It seems like a few might have moved. And now the flowers are going to do their thing. There are two different ways that you can insert handles, and your instruction sheet is going to guide you to do it right now. I'm a little concerned with the placement of my flowers, whether or not I will be able to set these in handles level on the sides. Now, if you have flowers spread everywhere like I do, you can wait and set the handles in the next round. I have a tray that was poured earlier, and this one didn't have the handles set in, but I just want to show how it will kind of feel, and there'll be space here. The handles can go in right away. If you had an arrangement that was more similar to this and you have space to put the handles in, you can absolutely do that now. I'm trying to decide whether or not it would be best to just show it. I think I might wiggle some of my flowers out of the way and then show them in this round. But if you're not feeling like moving anything, you could set them in, follow all the instructions that we go through today, but you could set them in during the second pour. Before we work with the handles, we need to make sure the gloves are clean. If your gloves are sticky, there is a 100% chance that the sticky gloves could knock your handles over into the resin. If this does happen, try to remain calm. It's a bummer, but it's a very easy fix. We just want to pull the handle out of the resin. You want to wipe it down with a paper towel, make sure it's completely cleaned off, and then reset it. To help prevent anything from falling over, I will do a few test runs with my handles first. This is also going to give you good feedback whether or not your gloves are sticky. I'm going to come to the side of the mold. I'm going to find the bottoms of my handles, give them a wiggle so I can feel that they are flat, and then I will hover my fingers for no less than 5 seconds. If anything is going to fall over, it typically happens within that first 5 seconds. You can catch and you can reset. A little wiggle, let it press them flat, hover, and then reset. Okay, so little test run, make sure we're feeling good. I have my tweezers. I might just shift this a little to the side. For now, I might be able to move it back, but for now I'm going to create a little bit of space for my handles. There. Okay. Now I'm going to bring them in. Mine are going to sit about a half of an inch away from the edge of the mold. You could bring them in a little further if you want a full inch, but I think about a half is good for this. I'm going to give them just a little hover. I can feel that they're flat. I'm just a little concerned with this flower, so I might move it out of the way. There we go. Okay, so we'll bring them back in. I'm pushing down to remove any air bubbles from underneath, giving this a little wiggle shake side to side, hover, and then I will release. Once the second handle is in, I'll kind of stand above this so I have more of an aerial view, and that's going to give you better feedback to know whether or not these handles are parallel to one another. I'm not going to move this tray. Moving the tray creates a big risk of the handles falling over, so we're going to leave the tray where it is, but I am going to pan my camera up a little bit so you can see me go through this process on the other side. I'm going to bring it over. I don't think I have to move anything on this side. Things are looking pretty good here. I'm going to find the base. I'm giving my handles a gentle wiggle from side to side. They feel flat. I will hover my fingers and then we'll release. Now that they are both set in, I can see that this handle is a little further over to the left, so I'm going to bring that back. When you make adjustments, continue to practice that hover. Although it seems like these handles won't fall over on you, trust me, it can happen without you realizing it. So just ensure that they're there, give them an extra hover, make sure they look good. And when you're happy with them, we're going to let this cure. This needs to cure for no less than 2 hours before we come in and pour a final layer. Because my gloves are not sticky, I am going to save them. I'm going to use them in the next round. If yours are a sticky mess, please don't worry too much. It does happen. And the next round is going to be relatively mess-free. It's a mix and a pour, so you should be good without them. If you have access to any gloves, feel free to grab those as well, but mine are still looking good, so I'm just going to pull them off, toss them to the side, and then we will be back for part 2. I also just want to note before I leave, I did not use the lighter again. If you see little air bubbles and you want to hit them kind of like a spot check, you can, but please be extra careful of those dried flowers. Now, we'll be back for part 2. I'll see you in a few hours.